You are listening to Dark Classics Narrated. Tonight's reading, Carmilla by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu. Written in 1872, this Gothic novella predates Dracula by 25 years. What follows is Episode 1, the prologue and an early fright. Upon a paper attached to the narrative which follows, Dr. Hesselius has written a rather elaborate note, which he accompanies with a reference to his essay on the strange subject which the manuscript illuminates. This mysterious subject he treats with his usual learning and acumen, and with remarkable directness and condensation. As I publish the case simply to interest the laity, I shall forestall the intelligent lady who relates it in nothing. I was anxious on discovering this paper to reopen the correspondence commenced by Dr. Hesselius so many years before. Much to my regret, however, I found that she had died in the interval. Chapter 1. An Early Fright. In Styria, we, though by no means magnificent people, inhabit a castle or schloss. Nothing can be more picturesque or solitary. It stands on a slight eminence in a forest. The road, very old and narrow, passes in front of its drawbridge, never raised in my time, and its moat stocked with perch and sailed over by many swans, and floating on its surface white fleets of water lilies. The forest opens in an irregular and very picturesque glade before its gate. Looking from the hall door towards the road, the forest in which our castle stands extends 15 miles to the right and 12 to the left. The nearest inhabited village is about 7 of your English miles to the left. I must tell you now how very small is the party who constitute the inhabitants of our castle. My father, who is the kindest man on earth, but growing old, and I, at the date of my story, only 19. 8 years have passed since then. The first occurrence in my existence which produced a terrible impression upon my mind, which in fact never has been effaced, was one of the very earliest incidents of my life which I can recollect. I can't have been more than 6 years old, when one night I awoke, and looking round the room from my bed, failed to see the nursery maid. I thought myself alone. I was not frightened, for I was one of those happy children studiously kept in ignorance of ghost stories, of fairy tales, and of all such lore as makes us cover up our heads when the door cracks suddenly. I was vexed and insulted at finding myself neglected, and I began to whimper, when to my surprise I saw a solemn but very pretty face looking at me from the side of the bed. It was that of a young lady who was kneeling, with her hands under the coverlet. She caressed me with her hands, and lay down beside me on the bed, and drew me towards her, smiling. I felt immediately delightfully soothed, and fell asleep again. I was wakened by a sensation as if 2 needles ran into my breast very deep at the same moment, and I cried loudly. The lady started back, with her eyes fixed on me, and then slipped down upon the floor, and as I thought, hid herself under the bed. I was now for the first time frightened. The housekeeper whispered to the nurse, "Lay your hand along that hollow in the bed." Someone did lie there, so sure as you did not. The place is still warm. It was a sweet summer evening, many years later, when my father asked me to take a little ramble with him along that beautiful forest vista which I have mentioned as lying in front of the Schloss. "General Spielstoff cannot come to us so soon as I had hoped," said my father, as we pursued our walk. "And how soon does he come?" I asked. "Not till autumn. Not for 2 months, I dare say. And I am very glad now, dear, that you never knew Mademoiselle Rheinfeldt." "And why?" I asked, both mortified and curious. "Because the poor young lady is dead." The General's letter was extraordinary, vehement, and in some places self-contradictory. It said, "The fiend who betrayed our infatuated hospitality has done it all. I devote my remaining days to tracking and extinguishing a monster. I cannot write or talk collectedly now. I am distracted. Farewell. Pray for me, dear friend." At this moment, the unwanted sound of carriage wheels and many hoofs upon the road arrested our attention. Just as the carriage had passed the summit of the steep bridge, one of the leaders, taking fright, communicated his panic to the rest, and after a plunge or two, the whole team broke into a wild gallop together and came thundering along the road towards us with the speed of a hurricane. The excitement of the scene was made more painful by the clear, long-drawn screams of a female voice from the carriage window. Through the carriage door was now lifted a young lady who appeared to be lifeless. My father had just had his fingers on her wrist and assured the lady, who declared herself her mother, that her pulse, though faint and irregular, was undoubtedly still distinguishable. "Who was ever being so born to calamity?" the mother cried. "Here am I on a journey of life and death. My child will not have recovered sufficiently to resume her route, for who can say how long? I must leave her. I cannot, dare not, delay." I plucked my father by the coat and whispered earnestly in his ear, "Oh, Papa, pray ask her to let her stay with us. It would be so delightful. Do, pray." And so she came to stay. Her name was Carmilla. This has been Dark Classics Narrated. Carmilla by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu. Episode 1. Next episode, a guest arrives. Subscribe now and follow Carmilla into the dark. Dark Classics Narrated presents Carmilla. Chapter 2. A Guest. I am now going to tell you something so strange that it will require all your faith in my veracity to believe my story. It is not only true, nevertheless, but truth of which I have been an eyewitness. It was a sweet summer evening, and my father asked me, as he sometimes did, to take a little ramble with him along that beautiful forest vista which I have mentioned as lying in front of the Schloss. "General Spielsdorf cannot come to us so soon as I had hoped," said my father, as we pursued our walk. "He was to have paid us a visit of some weeks, and we had expected his arrival next day. He was to have brought with him a young lady, his niece and ward, Mademoiselle Rheinfeldt, whom I had never seen, but whom I had heard described as a very charming girl, and in whose society I had promised myself many happy days. I was more disappointed than a young lady living in a town or a bustling neighborhood can possibly imagine. This visit, and the new acquaintance it promised, had furnished my daydream for many weeks. "And how soon does he come?" I asked. "Not till autumn, not for 2 months, I dare say," he answered. "And I am very glad now, dear, that you never knew Mademoiselle Rheinfeldt." "And why?" I asked, both mortified and curious. "Because the poor young lady is dead," he replied. "I quite forgot I had not told you, but you were not in the room when I received the General's letter this evening. I was very much shocked. General Spelsdorf had mentioned in his first letter, 6 or 7 weeks before, that she was not so well as he would wish her, but there was nothing to suggest the remotest suspicion of danger. 'Here is the General's letter,' he said, handing it to me. 'I am afraid he is in great affliction. The letter appears to me to have been written very nearly in distraction.' We sat down on a rude bench under a group of magnificent lime trees. The sun was setting with all its melancholy splendor behind the sylvan horizon, and the stream that flows beside our home and passes under the steep old bridge I have mentioned wound through many a group of noble trees, almost at our feet, reflecting in its current the fading crimson of the sky. General Spielsdorf's letter was so extraordinary, so vehement, and in some places so self-contradictory that I read it twice over, the second time aloud to my father, and was still unable to account for it, except by supposing that grief had unsettled his mind. It said, "I have lost my darling daughter, for as such I loved her. During the last days of dear Bertha's illness, I was not able to write to you. Before then, I had no idea of her danger. I have lost her, and now learn all too late. She died in the peace of innocence, and in the glorious hope of a blessed futurity. The fiend who betrayed our infatuated hospitality has done it all. I thought I was receiving into my house innocence, gaiety, a charming companion for my lost Bertha. Heavens, what a fool have I been! I thank God my child died without a suspicion of the cause of her sufferings. She is gone without so much as conjecturing the nature of her illness, and the accursed passion of the agent of all this misery. I devote my remaining days to tracking and extinguishing a monster. I am told I may hope to accomplish my righteous and merciful purpose. At present there is scarcely a gleam of light to guide me. I curse my conceited incredulity, my despicable affectation of superiority, my blindness, my obstinacy, or too late. I cannot write or talk collectedly now. I am distracted. So soon as I shall have a little recovered, I mean to devote myself for a time to inquiry, which may possibly lead me as far as Vienna. Some time in the autumn, 2 months hence, or earlier if I live, I will see you. That is, if you permit me. I will then tell you all that I scarce dare put upon paper now. Farewell. Pray for me, dear friend. In these terms ended this strange letter. Though I had never seen Bertha Reinfeldt, my eyes filled with tears at the sudden intelligence. I was startled, as well as profoundly disappointed. The sun had now set, and it was twilight by the time I had returned the General's letter to my father. It was a soft, clear evening, and we loitered, speculating upon the possible meanings of the violent and incoherent sentences which I had just been reading. We had nearly a mile to walk before reaching the road that passes the Schloss in front, and by that time the moon was shining brilliantly. At the drawbridge we met Madame Perrodon and Mademoiselle de La Fontaine, who had come out, without their bonnets, to enjoy the exquisite moonlight. We heard their voices gabbling in animated dialogue as we approached. We joined them at the drawbridge and turned about to admire with them the beautiful scene. The glade through which we had just walked lay before us. At our left, the narrow road wound away under clumps of lordly trees and was lost to sight amid the thickening forest. At the right, the same road crosses the steep and picturesque bridge, near which stands a ruined tower which once guarded that pass. And beyond the bridge, an abrupt eminence rises, covered with trees, and showing in the shadows some grey ivy-clustered rocks. Over the sward and low grounds, a thin film of mist was stealing like smoke, marking the distances with a transparent veil, and here and there we could see the river faintly flashing in the moonlight. No softer, sweeter scene could be imagined. The news I had just heard made it melancholy, but nothing could disturb its character of profound serenity and the enchanted glory and vagueness of the prospect. My father, who enjoyed the picturesque, and I stood looking in silence over the expanse beneath us. The 2 good governesses, standing a little way behind us, discoursed upon the scene and were eloquent upon the moon. Madame Perrodon was fat, middle-aged, and romantic, and talked and sighed poetically. Mademoiselle de La Fontaine, in right of her father who was a German, assumed to be psychological, metaphysical, and something of a mystic, now declared that when the moon shone with a light so intense, it was well known that it indicated a special spiritual activity. The effect of the full moon in such a state of brilliancy was manifold. It acted on dreams, it acted on lunacy, it acted on nervous people, it had marvelous physical influences connected with life. Mademoiselle related that her cousin, who was mate of a merchant ship, having taken a nap on deck on such a night, lying on his back, with his face full in the light of the moon, had wakened after a dream of an old woman clawing him by the cheek,
with his features horribly drawn to one side, and his countenance had never quite recovered its equilibrium. "The moon this night," she said, "is full of idyllic and magnetic influence. And see, when you look behind you at the front of the Schloss, how all its windows flash and twinkle with that silvery splendor, as if unseen hands had lighted up the rooms to receive fairy guests. There are indolent styles of the spirits in which, indisposed to talk ourselves, the talk of others is pleasant to our listless ears." And I gazed on, pleased with the tinkle of the ladies' conversation. "I have got into one of my moping moods tonight," said my father, after a silence, and quoting Shakespeare, whom, by way of keeping up our English, he used to read aloud, he said, "In truth, I know not why I am so sad. It wearies me. You say it wearies you, but how I got it, came by it. I forget the rest. But I feel as if some great misfortune were hanging over us. I suppose the poor General's afflicted letter has had something to do with it." At this moment, the unwonted sound of carriage wheels and many hoofs upon the road arrested our attention. They seemed to be approaching from the high ground overlooking the bridge, and very soon the equipage emerged from that point. 2 horsemen first crossed the bridge, then came a carriage drawn by 4 horses, and 2 men rode behind. It seemed to be the travelling carriage of a person of rank, and we were all immediately absorbed in watching that very unusual spectacle. It became, in a few moments, greatly more interesting. For just as the carriage had passed the summit of the steep bridge, one of the leaders, taking fright, communicated his panic to the rest, and after a plunge or two, the whole team broke into a wild gallop together, and dashing between the horsemen who rode in front, came thundering along the road towards us with the speed of a hurricane. The excitement of the scene was made more painful by the evident distress of a lady in the carriage, who was visibly praying to heaven for help, and who, as the equipage thundered past us, threw herself from the window with a desperate effort to save herself, but was caught by the postilion who rode behind, and with the assistance of one of the outriders, was safely deposited upon the sward. The carriage, meanwhile, continued its furious course, and was lost to sight in the distance. We all ran to the assistance of the lady, who had sunk down almost fainting upon the grass. She was a very beautiful young woman, of about my own age, and was dressed in black. She had a profusion of very long black hair, and very large dark eyes, and the most delicate features imaginable. Her expression was at once languid and melancholy. My father was the first to reach and raise her. She was evidently quite helpless, and her limbs seemed almost powerless. He supported her in his arms, while Madame Perrodon and Mademoiselle de La Fontaine applied such restoratives as they had at hand, and in a few moments she opened her eyes and looked about her with a bewildered air. "Where is Mamma?" were the first words she uttered. We looked round, but there was no sign of the elder lady. "Where is the carriage?" she asked, looking in the direction in which it had disappeared. "It has gone on," we told her. She sighed deeply and seemed on the point of fainting again. We carried her to the bench under the lime trees, and my father sent one of the servants for the doctor, who lived about a mile away. The young lady was now able to sit up, and she looked round her with a bewildered and somewhat frightened air. "How came I here? What is this place?" she asked. My father told her, as gently as he could, what had happened and where she was. She listened with evident surprise and distress. "Where is Mamma?" she repeated. "We do not know," my father answered. "She was not in the carriage when it passed us. Perhaps she remained behind with the servants." The young lady shook her head, and tears filled her eyes. "I do not know," she said. "I cannot understand it. I remember nothing but that we were driving very fast, and that Mamma told me to jump out if the horses took fright, and then everything became confused." She put her hand to her forehead and seemed trying to collect her thoughts. We tried to comfort her, and my father assured her that everything possible should be done to find her mother, and that she should remain with us until she could be restored to her. She thanked him with a sweet, sad smile, and said she felt very weak, and begged that we would not leave her. The doctor soon arrived, and after examining her, said that she had sustained no serious injury, but that she was suffering from the shock and must be kept perfectly quiet for some hours. We conveyed her, with all possible care, to the Schloss, and placed her in one of the prettiest rooms, looking out upon the forest and the river. She seemed much fatigued, and soon fell into a quiet sleep. My father dispatched servants in different directions to make inquiries after the missing lady and the carriage, but without success. No trace of either could be discovered. Chapter 3. We compare notes. We followed the cortege with our eyes until it was swiftly lost to sight in the misty wood, and the very sound of the hooves and the wheels died away in the silent night air. Nothing remained to assure us that the adventure had not been an illusion of a moment, but the young lady, who just at that moment opened her eyes. I could not see, for her face was turned from me, but she raised her head, evidently looking about her, and I heard a very sweet voice ask complainingly, "Where is Mamma?" Our good Madame Perrodon answered tenderly and added some comfortable assurances. I then heard her ask, "Where am I? What is this place?" And after that she said, "I don't see the carriage. And Matska, where is Mamma?" Madame assured her that the carriage had gone on, and that her mamma would doubtless return for her in a very few days. She seemed very much gratified at finding herself in a comfortable home and under kind care. She was a very engaging person, and soon became a great favorite with us all. When Madame Perrodon and Mademoiselle de La Fontaine had retired, and my father and I were left alone with her, she said, "I am so much obliged to you all for your kindness to a poor stranger. I fear I have been a sad trouble to you, but you have all been so kind, and I feel already quite at home." She looked at me with such a pretty, imploring smile that I could not help taking her hand and pressing it. "You are very kind," she said. "I like you so much. I am sure we shall be great friends." She often took my hand and held it, and pressed it softly while she talked to me. I felt a strange thrill when she did so. We sat up rather late that night, talking over the strange adventure of the evening. Madame Perrodon and Mademoiselle de La Fontaine were both of our party. The young lady, whose name we now learned was Carmilla, seemed quite recovered from the shock, and was very animated and entertaining. She told us that her mother was a lady of great rank in the neighborhood, but that she was traveling on important business, and that she would return for her in about 3 months. We all liked her extremely, and I felt quite a romantic interest in her. The next morning Carmilla came down to breakfast looking quite herself again. She was very beautiful, with a profusion of very long black hair and very large dark eyes, and the most delicate features imaginable. Her expression was at once languid and melancholy. My father welcomed her most cordially, and she thanked him with a sweet, sad smile. We compared notes about our dreams and experiences, and found that we had both had strange dreams on the night of her arrival. She told me that she had dreamed of a young woman who came to her bedside and kissed her, and that she felt a sharp pain in her breast. I told her that I had had a similar dream. We were both very much interested in each other's stories. We now laughed together over our momentary horrors. Chapter 4. Her Habits, a Saunter. I told you that I was charmed with her in most particulars. There were some that did not please me so well. She was above the middle height of women. I shall begin by describing her. She was slender and wonderfully graceful, except that her movements were languid, very languid. Indeed, there was nothing in her appearance to indicate an invalid. Her complexion was rich and brilliant. Her features were small and beautifully formed. Her eyes large, dark, and lustrous.
Her hair was quite wonderful. I never saw hair so magnificently thick and long when it was down about her shoulders. I have often placed my hands under it and laughed with wonder at its weight. It was exquisitely fine and soft, and in color a rich, very dark brown, with something of gold. I loved to let it down, tumbling with its own weight, as in her room she lay back in her chair, talking in her sweet, low voice, and looking at me with her curious and sometimes melancholy eyes. She was above the middle height of women. I shall begin by describing her. She was slender and wonderfully graceful, except that her movements were languid, very languid. Indeed, there was nothing in her appearance to indicate an invalid. Her habits were peculiar. She was very late in the morning and very late at night. She would sit up reading or talking until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and then retire to her room and sleep till the afternoon. She would then come down to the drawing room in her dressing gown and lie on the sofa and talk or read, or sometimes she would play a little on the piano, very softly and dreamily. She was very fond of flowers, and I used to bring her fresh ones every day from the garden and the forest. She would place them in her bosom or in her hair, and seemed to take great pleasure in them. She had a strange way of talking. She would often speak in a kind of rhapsody, half playful, half passionate, and sometimes she would say the strangest things. One evening we were sitting together in the drawing room. My father had gone out for a walk, and we were alone. She was lying on the sofa, and I was sitting near her. She took my hand and held it, and looked at me with her large, dark eyes. "You are very beautiful," she said. "I like you more than I can tell. I don't know how it is, but I feel as if I had known you for a long time. I feel as if we were sisters." I smiled and pressed her hand. "I feel the same," I said. "I am so glad you came to us." She drew me towards her and kissed me on the cheek. "I live in your warm life," she whispered, "and you shall die sweetly, into mine." I started a little at the strange words, but she laughed softly and said, "Don't mind me. I am full of whims and fancies. I was only talking nonsense." She often spoke in this wild way, and I used to laugh at her and call her a romancer. She had a way of embracing me that was almost passionate, and sometimes I felt a little frightened, though I could not tell why. Her habits were strange in other ways. She never took any exercise, except a short saunter in the evening. She would walk very slowly, leaning on my arm, and often she would stop and look about her as if she were listening or watching for something. She slept very little, and her sleep was often disturbed by dreams. She would start and cry out in her sleep, and sometimes she would talk in her sleep, but I could never make out what she said. She was very fond of me, and I grew very fond of her. There was something about her that was strangely attractive, and yet at times I felt a little uneasy in her presence. One day she said to me, "You have never been to a ball?" "No," I answered. "How charming it must be. I almost forget what it is like. It is years since I was at one." "You are not so old," I said, laughing. "I am older than you think," she answered, with a strange smile. So the days passed pleasantly enough, and Carmilla became more and more dear to me. Chapter 5. A Wonderful Likeness. When we got into the drawing room and had sat down to our coffee and chocolate, although it was then very late, and Madame and Mademoiselle had both retired, Carmilla said, "Tell me, Laura, have you ever been at a ball?" "No," I answered, "not even at a school ball." "I almost forget what it is like," she said. "It is years since I was at one. What a charming thing a ball must be. How delightful it would be to go to one with you." I laughed. "You are not so old," I said, "that you need speak in that way." "I am older than you think," she answered, with a strange smile. "I was born in Upper Styria, and my mother was a Karnstein. I am a descendant of the Karnsteins, an old family.
The Karnsteins were a great house once, but the last of them died more than 100 years ago. She looked at me with her large, dark eyes, and there was something in her look that made me feel a little uneasy. I am descended from the Karnsteins, she continued. They were a very ancient family, and their castle is not far from here. It is now in ruins, but it was once a magnificent place. She paused, and then said suddenly, "Have you ever heard of the Karnsteins?" "No," I answered. "They were a great and powerful family," she said. "But they are all gone now. The last of them died long ago." She sighed, and her eyes had a faraway look. "I wish I could show you the old castle," she said. "It is a beautiful ruin, and there are strange stories about it." "What kind of stories?" I asked. "Oh, wild stories," she answered. "Stories of ghosts and vampires and all sorts of terrible things. But you must not believe them. They're only foolish superstitions." She laughed, but there was something in her laugh that made me shiver a little. We sat talking for some time longer, and then Carmilla said she was tired and would go to bed. I went with her to her room, and as I was leaving her, she took me in her arms and kissed me. "Good night, my dear Laura," she said. "I am so happy with you. I feel as if we were sisters." "Good night, Carmilla," I answered. "Sleep well." She held me for a moment longer and then let me go. I went to my own room, feeling strangely excited and happy. I could not understand why I felt so much attached to Carmilla. There was something about her that was strangely fascinating, and yet at times I felt a little afraid of her. The next morning I was sitting at breakfast with my father when Carmilla came down. She looked pale and tired, and there were dark shadows under her eyes. "Are you not well, Carmilla?" I asked. "I am a little tired," she answered. "I did not sleep well last night. I had strange dreams." "What did you dream?" I asked. "I cannot remember," she said, "only that they were very unpleasant." She drank her coffee and then lay down on the sofa. "You must not exert yourself," I said. "You are not strong enough yet." She smiled and took my hand. "You are so kind to me," she said. "I do not know what I should do without you." We sat talking for some time, and then my father went out for his usual walk. Carmilla and I were left alone. She drew me towards her and looked into my face with her large, dark eyes. "You are very beautiful, Laura," she said. "I love you more than I can tell. I feel as if I could not live without you." I felt a strange thrill run through me as she spoke. "I love you too, Carmilla," I answered. She drew me closer and kissed me on the lips. At that moment I felt a sharp pain in my breast, like the prick of a needle. I started and drew back. "What is it?" she asked. "I felt a pain in my breast," I said. She looked at me with a strange smile. "It is nothing," she said, "only a fancy." But I could not help feeling uneasy. That night I had a strange dream. I dreamed that a great black cat was sitting on my breast and that it was sucking my breath. I tried to push it away, but I could not move. Then the cat changed into a woman, and the woman was Carmilla. She was looking at me with her large dark eyes, and there was blood on her lips. I woke with a start and found that my heart was beating violently. The next morning I told Carmilla about my dream. She laughed and said, "It is only a dream. Do not think about it." But I could not forget it. A few days later, as we were walking in the forest, Carmilla suddenly stopped and pointed to a picture that was hanging on the wall of an old chapel. "Look," she said, "that is a picture of my ancestor, the Countess Karnstein." I looked and saw the portrait of a beautiful woman with large dark eyes and long black hair. The face was exactly like Carmilla's. "It is wonderful," I said. "It is the very image of you." "Yes," she answered. "It is a wonderful likeness." She stood looking at the picture for some time and then turned away with a sigh. "Come," she said, "let us go on." As we walked back to the Schloss, I could not help thinking how strange it was that Carmilla should be so like the old portrait. Chapter 6. A Very Strange Agony. I cannot think of any time in my life when I felt so restless and uneasy as during the weeks that followed. I was constantly on the watch for something, I knew not what. I had a constant sense of danger, and yet I could not tell from what quarter it was to be apprehended. Carmilla became more and more attached to me. She was perpetually by my side. She would sit with me for hours, holding my hand and talking in her low, sweet voice. Or she would lie on the sofa with her head in my lap and look up at me with her large, dark, melancholy eyes. Her embraces were more and more passionate. Sometimes she would throw her arms about me and press me to her with almost frantic fondness, and kiss me again and again, murmuring all the while in a low, passionate voice, words that I could not understand. At such times I felt a strange mixture of pleasure and pain. There was something in her caresses that thrilled me, and yet at the same time filled me with a vague terror. One night I had a dream that was more vivid than any I had yet experienced. I dreamed that I was lying in my bed, and that the room was filled with a faint, mysterious light. Suddenly I saw a large black shape moving towards me. It was the figure of a woman, but it seemed to glide rather than walk. As it drew nearer, I saw that it was Carmilla. Her eyes were fixed upon me with a look of intense desire, and her lips were parted in a smile that showed her white teeth. She came to the side of my bed and bent over me. I tried to cry out, but my voice was paralyzed. I felt her long hair trailing over my face, and then her lips touched my throat. There was a sharp pain, like the prick of 2 needles, and then a sensation of sucking, as if my blood were being drawn from me. I awoke with a scream and found myself sitting up in bed, trembling in every limb. The room was dark, but I could see that Carmilla was not there. I got up and lighted a candle and looked about the room. Everything was as usual. I went to the door and tried it. It was locked, as I had left it. I returned to bed, but I could not sleep. The dream had been so vivid that I could still feel the pain in my throat. The next morning I told Carmilla what I had dreamed. She listened with great interest, and when I had finished she said, "It is very strange. I had almost the same dream. I dreamed that I was in your room, and that I saw you lying in bed, and that I came to you and kissed you on the throat. But in my dream there was no pain, only a delicious sensation." She laughed as she spoke, but there was something in her laugh that made me shudder. A few nights later, the same dream returned. This time it was even more vivid. I saw Carmilla standing by my bed, looking down at me with those great dark eyes. She bent over me, and again I felt the sharp pain in my throat, and the sensation of blood being drawn from me. I awoke in a cold perspiration, and this time I was so terrified that I got up and went to Carmilla's room. I opened the door softly and looked in. The room was empty. The bed had not been slept in. I returned to my own room in a state of great agitation. I could not understand what was happening. Was I going mad? Or was there some terrible reality behind these dreams? The next day, Carmilla appeared as usual, looking pale and languid. She complained of having passed a bad night and said she had had strange dreams. "I dreamed again of you," she said. "I dreamed that I was kissing you on the throat and that your blood was flowing into my lips. It was a delicious dream." She smiled as she spoke, and there was a look in her eyes that I had never seen before. I felt a cold shudder run through me. I could not answer her. From that time, my health began to fail. I became pale and weak, and I suffered from a constant sensation of lassitude. My father noticed the change in me and became alarmed. He sent for the doctor, who examined me carefully, but could find nothing wrong with me except a slight anemia. "You have been overexerting yourself," he said. "You must rest more and take plenty of exercise." But I knew that it was not overexertion that was the cause of my illness. I knew that it was something connected with Carmilla. One evening, as we were sitting together in the drawing room, Carmilla suddenly said, "Laura, I am going away." "Going away?" I exclaimed. "Where are you going?" "I cannot tell you," she answered, "but I must go. My mother has sent for me." "When will you return?" I asked. "I cannot tell," she said. "Perhaps never." I felt a pang of grief at her words. The thought of losing her was terrible to me. "Oh, Carmilla," I cried, "you must not go. I cannot bear to lose you." She took me in her arms and pressed me to her. "My darling," she whispered, "I love you more than life itself, but I must go. It is my fate." She kissed me passionately and then released me. The next morning she was gone. She had left during the night without saying goodbye to anyone. I was inconsolable. I wandered about the house like a ghost, and my health grew worse and worse. My father did everything he could to comfort me, but nothing could console me for the loss of Carmilla. Weeks passed, and there was no news of her. Then one day a letter came from the General Spielsdorf. It contained news that filled me with horror. The general wrote that he had traced the monster who had destroyed his ward, and that he had discovered that it was a member of the Karnstein family, a vampire that had been haunting the neighborhood for centuries. He begged my father to allow him to visit us and to bring with him a person who could help us to destroy the fiend. My father consented, and a few days later the general arrived, accompanied by a strange-looking man who was introduced as Baron Vordenberg, a noted vampire hunter. They told us a terrible story. The vampire was none other than Carmilla herself, the last of the Karnsteins, who had been dead for more than 100 years, but who still walked the earth in search of victims. I listened in speechless horror. Everything was now clear to me. The strange likeness to the portrait, the nocturnal absences, the dreams, the mysterious illness, all pointed to the same dreadful truth. Carmilla was a vampire. Chapter 7. Descending. It was about 10 months since we had first seen Carmilla, when my father received a letter from the General Spielsdorf, in which he announced his intention of paying us a visit. The general arrived accompanied by a gentleman whom he introduced as the Baron Vordenberg, a man of about 60 years of age, of a commanding appearance, and with a face that showed marks of much thought and study. The Baron was a descendant of the ancient family of Karnstein, and had devoted many years to the study of the strange and terrible subject of vampirism. After dinner, when we were all seated in the drawing room, the general began to relate the history of his ward's death and the circumstances which had led him to suspect the existence of a vampire in the neighborhood. He told us how he had traced the monster to its lair in the ruined chapel of the Karnsteins, and how he had there discovered the body of the Countess Mekala Karnstein, which, though it had been buried for more than a century, was still fresh and lifelike, with the cheeks glowing with the hue of life, and the lips red and moist. He described how, with the help of the Baron, he had driven a stake through the heart of the vampire, and how, as the stake was driven home, a piercing shriek had burst from the lips of the corpse, and a torrent of blood had gushed from the wound. The body had then been decapitated, and the head and body burned to ashes, which were thrown into the river. The general had hoped that this would put an end to the vampire's ravages, but he had since learned that the monster had not been destroyed, and that it was still at large in the neighborhood. He had come to us, he said, because he had reason to believe that the vampire had fixed upon our house as its next victim. My father listened with deep attention, and then asked the Baron if he could explain the strange circumstances connected with Carmilla. The Baron replied that he could. He told us that Carmilla was no other than the Countess Mikala Karnstein, who had been dead for more than 100 years, but who still walked the earth in the form of a beautiful young woman. He explained that vampires have the power of assuming different shapes, and that they can also take the form of a cat or other animal. He further told us that the only way to destroy a vampire is to drive a stake through its heart while it is in its coffin during the day, and then to cut off its head and burn the body. My father was greatly shocked by this revelation and asked what we were to do. The Baron replied that we must find the vampire's lair and destroy it before it could do any more mischief. He asked if we had any portrait of Carmilla, and when we showed him the picture which Carmilla had pointed out to me in the old chapel, he examined it carefully and said that it was undoubtedly the portrait of the Countess Mircalla Karnstein. He then asked to see Carmilla's room, and we took him there. He examined the bed and the furniture with great care, and then said that he had no doubt that the vampire had occupied the room. He told us that we must watch the room carefully that night, and that if the vampire returned, we must be prepared to destroy it. We accordingly made our preparations. The Baron provided us with sharp stakes and mallets, and also with holy water and a crucifix. We stationed ourselves in Carmilla's room and waited. The night passed quietly, and nothing happened. The next night we watched again, but with the same result. On the third night, as we were sitting in the room, we heard a soft sound at the window. We looked up and saw a large black cat creeping in through the open window. The Baron sprang forward and struck at it with his stake, but the creature escaped and disappeared through the window. We searched the room carefully, but could find no trace of the vampire. The Baron then told us that we must open the tomb of the Countess Karnstein and destroy the body. We accordingly set out the next day for the ruined chapel. When we arrived there, we found the tomb, and with great difficulty we opened it. Inside we found the body of a beautiful young woman, which, though it had been buried for more than a century, was still fresh and lifelike, with the cheeks glowing with the hue of life, and the lips red and moist. The Baron drove a stake through the heart, and as he did so, a piercing shriek burst from the lips of the corpse, and a torrent of blood gushed from the wound. The body was then decapitated, and the head and body burned to ashes, which were thrown into the river. We returned to the Schloss, feeling that we had at last destroyed the monster. But our joy was short-lived, for that very night I had another terrible dream. I dreamed that Carmilla came to me and said, "You think you have destroyed me, but you are mistaken. I shall return, and you shall be mine." I awoke with a scream and found that my throat was bleeding. My father and the Baron came running in, and when they saw the wound, they knew that the vampire was not yet destroyed. The Baron examined the wound and said that it was the mark of the vampire's teeth. He told us that we must find the vampire's lair and destroy it once and for all. We searched the neighborhood for several days, but could find no trace of the monster. At last the Baron said that he had a plan. He told us that vampires must return to their graves before sunrise, and that if we could find the grave, we could destroy the vampire when it returned. We accordingly watched the ruined chapel every night. One night, as we were watching, we saw a figure approaching. It was the figure of a woman, dressed in black. As it drew nearer, we saw that it was Carmilla. She glided towards the tomb and disappeared into it. The Baron sprang forward and drove his stake through the heart of the figure as it lay in the coffin. A piercing shriek burst from the lips of the vampire, and it struggled violently. The Baron held it down, while my father cut off the head with a sword. The body was then burned to ashes, which were thrown into the river. This time we were sure that the monster was destroyed. Chapter 8. Search. At sight of the room, perfectly undisturbed except for our violent entrance, we began to cool a little, and soon recovered our senses sufficiently to dismiss the men.
It had struck Mademoiselle that possibly Carmilla had been wakened by the uproar at her door, and in her first panic had jumped from her bed and hid herself in a press or behind a curtain, from which she could not, of course, emerge until the major domo and his myrmidons had withdrawn. We now recommenced our search and began to call her by name again. It was all to no purpose. Our perplexity and agitation increased. We examined the windows, but they were secured. I implored of Carmilla, if she had concealed herself, to play this cruel trick no longer, to come out, and to end our anxieties. It was all useless. I was by this time convinced that she was not in the room, nor in the dressing room, the door of which was still locked on this side. She could not have passed it. I was utterly puzzled. Had Carmilla discovered one of those secret passages which the old housekeeper said were known to exist in the Schloss, although the tradition of their exact situation had been lost? A little time would, no doubt, explain all, utterly perplexed as, for the present, we were. It was past 4 o'clock, and I preferred passing the remaining hours of darkness in Madame's room. Daylight brought no solution of the difficulty. The whole household, with my father at its head, was in a state of agitation next morning. Every part of the chateau was searched. The grounds were explored. Not a trace of the missing lady could be discovered. The stream was about to be dragged. My father was in distraction. What a tale to have to tell the poor girl's mother on her return. I, too, was almost beside myself, though my grief was quite of a different kind. The morning was passed in alarm and excitement. It was now 1 o'clock, and still no tidings. I ran up to Carmilla's room and found her standing at her dressing table. I was astounded. I could not believe my eyes. She beckoned me to her with her pretty finger in silence. Her face expressed extreme fear. I ran to her in an ecstasy of joy. I kissed and embraced her again and again. I ran to the bell and rang it vehemently to bring others to the spot, who might at once relieve my father's anxiety. "Dear Carmilla, what has become of you all this time? We have been in agonies of anxiety about you," I exclaimed. "Where have you been? How did you come back?" "Last night has been a night of wonders," she said. "For mercy's sake, explain all you can." "It was past 2 last night," she said, "when I went to sleep as usual in my bed, with my doors locked, that of the dressing room, and that opening upon the gallery. My sleep was uninterrupted, and so far as I know, dreamless. But I awoke just now on the sofa in the dressing room there, and I found the door between the rooms open, and the other door forced. How could all this have happened without my being wakened? It must have been accompanied with a great deal of noise, and I am particularly easily wakened. And how could I have been carried out of my bed without my sleep having been interrupted, I whom the slightest stir startles?" By this time, Mademoiselle, my father, and a number of the servants were in the room. Carmilla was, of course, overwhelmed with inquiries, congratulations, and welcomes. She had but one story to tell, and seemed the least able of all the party to suggest any way of accounting for what had happened. My father took a turn up and down the room, thinking. I saw Carmilla's eye follow him for a moment, with a sly, dark glance. When my father had sent the servants away, Mademoiselle having gone in search of a little bottle of valerian and sal volatile, and there being no one now in the room with Carmilla except my father, Madame, and myself, he came to her thoughtfully, took her hand very kindly, led her to the sofa, and sat down beside her. "Will you forgive me, my dear, if I risk a conjecture and ask a question?" "Who can have a better right?" she said. "Ask what you please, and I will tell you everything. But my story is simply one of bewilderment and darkness. I know absolutely nothing. Put any question you please. But you know, of course, the limitations Mamma has placed me under." "Perfectly, my dear child. I need not approach the topics on which she desires our silence. Now, the marvel of last night consists in your having been removed from your bed and your room without being wakened,
and this removal having occurred apparently while the windows were still secured and the 2 doors locked upon the inside. I will tell you my theory, and first ask you a question. Carmilla was leaning on her hand dejectedly. Madame and I were listening breathlessly. Now my question is this: have you ever been suspected of walking in your sleep? Never, since I was very young indeed. But you did walk in your sleep when you were young. Yes, I know I did. I have been told so often by my old nurse. My father smiled and nodded. Well, what has happened is this. You got up in your sleep, unlocked the door, not leaving the key, as usual, in the lock, but taking it out and locking it on the outside. You again took the key out and carried it away with you to some one of the 25 rooms on this floor, or perhaps upstairs or downstairs. There are so many rooms and closets, so much heavy furniture, and such accumulations of lumber that it would require a week to search this old house thoroughly. Do you see now what I mean? I do, but not all, she answered. And how, Papa, do you account for her finding herself on the sofa in the dressing room, which we had searched so carefully? She came there after you had searched it, still in her sleep, and at last awoke spontaneously, and was as much surprised to find herself where she was as anyone else. I wish all mysteries were as easily and innocently explained as yours, Carmilla, he said, laughing. And so we may congratulate ourselves on the certainty that the most natural explanation of the occurrence is one that involves no drugging, no tampering with locks, no burglars or poisoners or witches, nothing that need alarm Carmilla or anyone else for our safety. Carmilla was looking charmingly. Nothing could be more beautiful than her tints. Her beauty was, I think, enhanced by that graceful languor that was peculiar to her. I think my father was silently contrasting her looks with mine, for he said, "I wish my poor Laura was looking more like herself." And he sighed. So our alarms were happily ended, and Carmilla restored to her friends. Chapter 9. The Doctor. As Carmilla would not hear of an attendant sleeping in her room, my father arranged that a servant should sleep outside her door so that she could not attempt to make another such excursion without being arrested at her own door. That night passed quietly, and next morning early, the doctor, whom my father had sent for without telling me a word about it, arrived to see me. Madame accompanied me to the library. The doctor was sent for, and he and my father entered. The doctor, who was an elderly man, with a sharp, intelligent face and a manner that inspired confidence, looked at me very attentively, and then asked me a number of questions about my health and my symptoms. I told him everything: how I had been suffering from a strange lassitude, how I had lost my appetite, and how I had been troubled with dreams and a constant sense of uneasiness. He listened carefully and then examined me. He felt my pulse, looked at my tongue, and sounded my chest. When he had finished, he sat down and looked at me gravely. "You have been through a good deal," he said, "and your nervous system has suffered. But there is nothing organically wrong with you. You are suffering from a severe shock, and you need rest and quiet." My father looked relieved, but the doctor had not finished. "There is one thing, however," he continued, "that I must mention. I noticed 2 small punctures on your throat, just over the jugular vein. They look like the marks of teeth. Have you any idea how they came there?" I felt myself grow pale. I glanced at my father, who was looking at me anxiously. I don't know," I stammered. "I think I must have scratched myself in my sleep." The doctor shook his head. "These are not scratches," he said. "They are the marks of 2 sharp points pressed into the skin. They are very slight, but quite distinct." He turned to my father. "Have you any rats in the house?" he asked. "None that I know of," my father answered. "Then I am at a loss to account for them," said the doctor. "But I must warn you that these marks are very like the bites of a vampire bat. There have been cases of that kind in this part of the country." My father started. "A vampire bat," he exclaimed. "Surely you don't mean—" "I mean exactly what I say," the doctor interrupted. "There is a species of bat that attacks human beings and sucks their blood. It is a very rare creature, but it does exist. The marks on your daughter's throat are precisely such as would be made by the teeth of such a bat." He paused, and then added gravely, "I have known cases where the victim has been reduced to a state of extreme weakness by the repeated attacks of the creature. In some instances, the patient has actually died." My father was silent for a moment. Then he said, "What is to be done?" "The first thing," said the doctor, "is to have the room thoroughly searched for the bat. It may be hiding somewhere in the house. And the young lady must not sleep alone. Someone must watch in her room every night." He wrote a prescription for a tonic and recommended that I should take plenty of exercise and fresh air. When he had gone, my father told Madame and Madame Millar what the doctor had said. They were both greatly alarmed and insisted that I should not be left alone for a moment. That night, Madame slept in my room. The windows were carefully secured and the doors locked. But I could not sleep. I lay awake, listening for any sound that might betray the presence of the dreadful creature. Towards morning, I fell into a troubled sleep and dreamed that I saw Carmilla standing by my bed, looking down at me with her great dark eyes. She bent over me, and I felt again the sharp pain in my throat. I awoke with a cry. Madame was bending over me. "What is it, my dear?" she asked. "I had a bad dream," I said. She soothed me, and I fell asleep again. The next day, I was weaker than ever. My father was now seriously alarmed. He sent for the doctor again. The doctor examined the marks on my throat. They were deeper than before. "This is very serious," he said. "The creature has attacked her again. We must take stronger measures." He ordered that garlic should be hung about the windows and doors, and that a crucifix should be placed at the head of my bed. That night, Madame again slept in my room. We had a lamp burning, and the room was brightly lighted. But still, I could not rest. About 2 o'clock in the morning, I saw a large black shape moving across the floor. It was the bat. It flew to the window, and then came towards the bed. I screamed. Madame started up, and the creature flew out of the room through the open door. We searched the house, but could find no trace of it. The next morning, the doctor came again. He looked grave when he saw me. "You are growing weaker every day," he said. "We must find some way to protect you." He remained in consultation with my father for a long time. When he left, my father came to me. "My dear," he said, "the doctor thinks that you should go away for a change of air. He recommends that we should all go to Graz for a few weeks." I was too weak to make any objection. It was arranged that we should start in a few days. But before we could carry out this plan, something happened that changed everything. One evening, as I was sitting with Carmilla in the drawing room, she suddenly said, "Laura, I'm going away tomorrow." "Going away?" I cried. "Where?" "I cannot tell you," she answered, "but I must go. My mother has sent for me." I was overwhelmed with grief. The thought of losing her was more than I could bear. "Oh, Carmilla," I sobbed, "don't leave me. I cannot live without you." She took me in her arms and kissed me. "My darling," she whispered, "I love you more than life itself, but I must go. It is my fate." The next morning she was gone. She had left during the night, without saying goodbye to anyone. I was inconsolable. My weakness increased, and I felt that I was sinking fast. My father was in despair. He sent for the doctor once more. The doctor shook his head when he saw me. "It is too late," he said. "The creature has done its work. Unless we can destroy it, she will die." My father asked what could be done. "We must find the vampire's grave," said the doctor, "and destroy the body." But how were we to find it? We knew nothing of the history of Carmilla. We did not even know her real name. It was then that my father remembered the portrait in the old chapel, the portrait that was so like Carmilla. He sent for the Baron Vordenberg, the descendant of the Karnsteins, who had helped the general in his search for the vampire. The Baron came at once. He examined the portrait and declared that it was the Countess Mircalla Karnstein, who had been dead for more than 100 years. He told us the terrible history of the Karnstein family and how the Countess had become a vampire after her death. He said that the only way to save me was to find her tomb and destroy the body. We set out that very day for the ruined chapel of the Karnsteins.
Chapter 10. Bereaved. It was about 10 months since we had last seen him, but that time had sufficed to make an alteration of years in his appearance. He had grown thinner. Something of gloom and anxiety had taken the place of that cordial serenity which used to characterize his features. His dark blue eyes, always penetrating, now gleamed with a sterner light from under his shaggy grey eyebrows. It was not such a change as grief alone usually induces, and angrier passions seemed to have had their share in bringing it about. He had not long taken his seat when he said, "I have come, my dear friend, with news that will, I fear, shock and distress you, but it is right that you should know it at once. I have traced the monster to its lair. I have discovered the identity of the being who destroyed my poor child, and who is now, I have every reason to believe, threatening the life of your daughter." My father started and looked at him with an expression of horror and incredulity. "General," he said, "you cannot mean—" "I mean exactly what I say," replied the general. "The creature who called herself Carmilla is no other than the Countess Mircalla Karnstein, who has been dead and buried for more than a century. She is a vampire." My father was silent for a moment, overwhelmed by the extraordinary statement. The general continued, "I have learned her history from the Baron Vordenberg, who is a descendant of the Karnstein family and who has made the subject of vampirism his special study. The Countess Mircalla was buried in the ruined chapel near your Schloss. Her body has been found there, still fresh and lifelike after more than 100 years. It must be destroyed without delay, or your daughter will share the fate of my poor Bertha." My father rose and paced the room in great agitation. "This is monstrous," he said. "If it is true, we must act at once. But how can we be certain?" "I am certain," said the general. "I have seen the tomb with my own eyes. I have seen the body, and I have seen the marks upon the throat of my child, marks exactly similar to those upon your daughter's throat." He turned to me. "My dear young lady," he said kindly, "I know how terrible this must be for you, but you must be brave. The creature who has fastened herself upon you under the name of Carmilla is a fiend from the pit of hell. She must be destroyed, or she will destroy you." I could not speak. The horror of the revelation was too great. I felt as if I were in a dreadful dream. The general then told us the whole story of his search. He had traced the vampire step by step, following the clues left by its victims, until he had discovered the ruined tomb of the Karnsteins. There, with the help of the Baron Vordenberg and a skilled physician, they had opened the coffin and found the body of the Countess Mircalla, looking as fresh and beautiful as in life, with the lips red and moist, and the cheeks glowing with color. They had driven a sharp stake through the heart, and the vampire had uttered a piercing shriek as the blood gushed from the wound. The head had then been severed from the body, and both had been burned to ashes, which were thrown into the river. But even after this, the general had learned that the evil was not yet ended. The vampire had other resting places, and its power was not completely broken. He had come to warn us and to urge that we should take immediate steps to protect me and to complete the destruction of the monster. My father listened with deep attention and then said, "We will do whatever is necessary. The safety of my child is the first consideration. Tell us what we must do."
The general replied that the Baron Vordenberg was even now on his way to join us, and that together they would superintend the search for any other resting place the vampire might have, and ensure its final destruction. In the meantime, I must be carefully watched, and every precaution taken to prevent the creature from approaching me again. That night I slept in my father's room, with trusted servants on guard outside, but sleep was impossible. The dreadful knowledge that Carmilla, the beautiful, fascinating companion I had loved, was in reality a loathsome vampire, filled me with horror and despair. The next day, the Baron Vordenberg arrived. He was a tall, grave man of scholarly appearance, who inspired confidence at once. He examined the marks on my throat and confirmed the general's opinion. "The case is clear," he said. "The vampire must be found and destroyed without delay. There is no time to lose." Preparations were at once begun for a thorough search of the ruined chapel and the surrounding district. Chapter 11. The Story. "With all my heart," said the general, with an effort, and after a short pause in which to arrange his subject, he commenced one of the strangest narratives I ever heard. "My dear child was looking forward with great pleasure to the visit you had been so good as to arrange for her to your charming daughter." Here he made me a gallant but melancholy bow. "In the meantime, we had an invitation to my old friend the Count Karlsfeld, whose schloss is about 6 leagues to the other side of Karnstein. It was to attend the series of fêtes which, you remember, were given by him in honor of his illustrious visitor, the Grand Duke Charles." "Yes, and very splendid, I believe they were," said my father. "Princely. But then his hospitalities are quite regal. He has Aladdin's lamp. The night from which my sorrow dates was devoted to a magnificent masquerade. The grounds were thrown open, the trees hung with colored lamps. There was such a display of fireworks as Paris itself had never witnessed. And such music. Music, you know, is my weakness. Such ravishing music. The finest instrumental band perhaps in the world, and the finest singers who could be collected from all the great operas in Europe. As you wandered through these fantastically illuminated grounds, the moonlighted chateau throwing a rosy light from its long rows of windows, you would suddenly hear these ravishing voices stealing from the silence of some grove or rising from boats upon the lake. I felt myself, as I looked and listened, carried back into the romance and poetry of my early youth. When the fireworks were ended and the ball beginning, we returned to the noble suite of rooms that were thrown open to the dancers. A masked ball, you know, is a beautiful sight, but so brilliant a spectacle of the kind I never saw before. It was a very aristocratic assembly. I was myself almost the only nobody present. My dear child was looking quite beautiful. She wore no mask. Her excitement and delight added an unspeakable charm to her features, always lovely. I remarked a young lady, dressed magnificently, but wearing a mask, who appeared to me to be observing my ward with extraordinary interest. I had seen her, earlier in the evening, in the great hall, and again, for a few minutes, walking near us on the terrace under the castle windows, similarly employed. A lady, also masked, richly and gravely dressed, and with a stately air, like a person of rank, accompanied her as a chaperone. Had the young lady not worn a mask, I could, of course, have been much more certain upon the question whether she was really watching my poor darling. I am now well assured that she was. We were now in one of the salons. My poor dear child had been dancing and was resting a little at one of the chairs near the door. I was standing near. The 2 ladies I have mentioned had approached, and the younger took the chair next my ward, while her companion stood beside me, and for a little time addressed herself in a low tone to her charge. Availing herself of the privilege of her mask, she turned to me, and in the tone of an old friend, and calling me by my name, opened a conversation with me, which piqued my curiosity a good deal. She referred to many scenes where she had met me, at court and at distinguished houses. She alluded to little incidents which I had long ceased to think of, but which, I found, had only lain in abeyance in my memory, for they instantly started into life at her touch. I became more and more curious to ascertain who she was every moment. She parried my attempts to discover very adroitly and pleasantly. The knowledge she showed of many passages in my life seemed to me all but unaccountable, and she appeared to take a not unnatural pleasure in foiling my curiosity and in seeing me flounder in my eager perplexity from one conjecture to another. In the meantime, the young lady, whom her mother called by the odd name of Millarca when she once or twice addressed her, had, with the same ease and grace, got into conversation with my ward. She introduced herself by saying that her mother was a very old acquaintance of mine. She spoke of the agreeable audacity which a mask rendered practicable. She talked like a friend. She admired her dress, and insinuated very prettily her admiration of her beauty. She amused her with laughing criticism upon the people who crowded the ballroom, and laughed at my poor child's fun. She was very witty and lively when she pleased, and after a time they had grown very good friends, and the young stranger lowered her mask, displaying a remarkably beautiful face. I had never seen it before, neither had my dear child. But though it was new to us, the features were so engaging, as well as lovely, that it was impossible not to feel the attraction powerfully. My poor girl did so. I never saw anyone more taken with another at first sight, unless, indeed, it was the stranger herself, who seemed quite to have lost her heart to her. In the meantime, availing myself of the license of a masquerade, I put not a few questions to the elder lady. "You have puzzled me utterly," I said, laughing. "Is that not enough? Won't you, now, consent to stand on equal terms, and do me the kindness to remove your mask?" "Can any request be more unreasonable?" she replied. "Ask a lady to yield an advantage. Beside, how do you know you should recognize me? Years make changes." "As you see," I said, with a bow and, I suppose, a rather melancholy little laugh. "As philosophers tell us," she said. "And how do you know that a sight of my face would help you?" "I should take chance for that," I answered. "It is vain trying to make yourself out an old woman. Your figure betrays you. Years, nevertheless, have passed since I saw you. Rather since you saw me, for that is what I am considering. Millarca, there, is my daughter. I cannot then be young, even in the opinion of people whom time has taught to be indulgent, and I may not like to be compared with what you remember me. You have no mask to remove. You can offer me nothing in exchange. My petition is to your pity, to remove it." "And mine to yours to let it stay where it is," she replied. "Well then, at least you will tell me whether you are French or German. You speak both languages so perfectly." "I don't think I shall tell you that, General. You intend a surprise, and are meditating the particular point of attack. At all events, you won't deny this," I said, "that being honored by your permission to converse, I ought to know how to address you. Shall I say, Madame la Comtesse?" She laughed, and she would, no doubt, have met me with another evasion, if indeed I can treat any occurrence in an interview every circumstance of which was prearranged, as I now believe, with the profoundest cunning, as liable to be modified by accident. "As to that," she began, but she was interrupted, almost as she opened her lips, by a gentleman dressed in black, who looked particularly elegant and distinguished, with this drawback, that his face was the most deadly pale I ever saw, except in death. He was in no masquerade, in the plain evening dress of a gentleman, and he said without a smile, but with a courtly and unusually low bow, "Will Madame la Comtesse permit me to say a very few words which may interest her?" The lady turned quickly to him and touched her lip in token of silence. She then said to me, "Keep my place for me, General. I shall return when I have said a few words." And with this injunction playfully given, she walked a little aside with the gentleman in black, and talked for some minutes, apparently very earnestly.
They then walked away slowly together in the crowd, and I lost them for some minutes. I spent the interval in cudgelling my brains for a conjecture as to the identity of the lady who seemed to remember me so kindly, and I was thinking of turning about and joining in the conversation between my pretty ward and the Countess's daughter, and trying whether, by the time she returned, I might not have a surprise in store for her by having discovered or guessed her name, when I saw her advancing towards me with a quick step and a look of great concern. "General," she said, "I have just been speaking with a gentleman who tells me that your ward has been taken suddenly ill, and that she has been carried to her room. I am most anxious to know whether the report is true, and if so, how serious the illness is." I was thunderstruck. I hurried with her to my ward's room. There I found my poor darling lying on her bed, pale as death, and in a state of utter prostration. The doctors were already in attendance, but they could make nothing of the case. She had been seized with a sudden faintness while talking to the young lady who had been so kind to her, and had been carried to her room in a state of insensibility. From that hour my dear child's health began to fail. She grew weaker and more languid. She complained of dreams and sensations which she could not describe, but which filled her with terror and depression. The young lady Millarca and her mother had disappeared from the ball, and no trace of them could be found. They had vanished as suddenly as they had appeared. I need not trouble you with all the details of my poor child's illness. It was mysterious and terrible. The physicians were baffled. She wasted away before our eyes, and at last, after weeks of suffering, she died in my arms, in the peace of innocence, and in the glorious hope of a blessed futurity. But before she died, she told me something that filled me with horror. She said that the young lady Millarca had come to her in the night and had kissed her, and that she had felt a sharp pain in her breast and a sensation as if her life were being drawn from her. She described the face of Millarca as it had appeared to her in these nocturnal visits, beautiful, but with an expression of cruel triumph and insatiable hunger. I now know that Millarca was no other than the vampire Countess Michala Karnstein, and that the masked lady was her accomplice or guardian in evil. The monster had fastened upon my darling, and had drained her young life away under the guise of friendship and affection. I have devoted my remaining days to tracking and extinguishing this fiend. I have learned much from the Baron Vordenberg and from ancient records. The Karnsteins were a house of vampires. Their tombs have been opened, and the bodies found fresh and lifelike after a century. They must be destroyed by stake and fire, or their evil will never cease. I have come to you because I have reason to believe that the same monster has now fixed upon your daughter. The symptoms are the same. The dreams, the marks upon the throat, the growing weakness. We must act without delay. The Baron is with me, and together we will find the resting place of the vampire and destroy it forever. The general's voice trembled with emotion as he concluded his strange and terrible story. We all sat in silence, overwhelmed by what we had heard. Chapter 12. A Petition. "Then we are to lose Madame la Comtesse, but I hope only for a few weeks," said my father as we sat together in the drawing-room after dinner. The general had left us that morning, and the Baron Vordenberg had departed the day before, after completing his investigations. Carmilla had been gone for some time, and the strange events which had so terrified us seemed to be fading into the past like a bad dream. My father was speaking of the approaching visit of the Countess, who had written to say that she would be with us in a few days. I was sitting by the window, looking out upon the beautiful forest and the river that wound through the valley. The sun was setting, and the whole scene was bathed in a soft, golden light. Suddenly I heard a low voice close to my ear. It was the voice of Carmilla. "You think I am gone," it whispered, "but I am with you still. I live in your warm life, and you shall die sweetly into mine." I started and turned quickly, but there was no one there. My father looked at me with concern. "What is it, my dear?" he asked. "Nothing," I answered. "Only a fancy." But I could not shake off the feeling that Carmilla was near me. That night, I had a dream. I saw her standing by my bed, more beautiful than ever, with her great dark eyes fixed upon me. She bent over me and kissed me on the throat. I felt the sharp pain again, and then a delicious languor stole over me. When I awoke in the morning, the marks upon my throat were visible once more. My father was greatly alarmed when he saw them. He sent immediately for the doctor and also wrote to the Baron Vordenberg, begging him to return. The Baron arrived the next day, and after examining the marks, he shook his head gravely. "The evil is not yet destroyed," he said. "The vampire has other resting places. We must find them all and complete the work." A thorough search was made of the ruined chapel and the surrounding country. At last, in a hidden vault beneath the old castle of the Karnsteins, they found another coffin. In it lay the body of Carmilla, looking as fresh and lovely as when she had first come to us. The Baron performed the terrible ceremony once more. A stake was driven through the heart, the head was severed, and the body was burned to ashes, which were scattered to the winds. From that time I have had no more dreams, no more visitations. My health has returned, and the shadow that hung over our house has passed away. My father and I live quietly now in the old schloss. Sometimes, when the moon is full and the night is still, I seem to hear a faint whisper or to feel a soft touch upon my cheek. But these sensations grow fainter every year, and I trust that in time they will cease altogether. The story I have told is true. It is a warning to all who may be tempted by beauty and fascination that conceal a deadly evil. And that concludes Carmilla by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu, the complete Gothic vampire classic. If you enjoyed this full narrated series, hit that like button, subscribe to Dark Classics Narrated, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new chapter or story. Drop a comment below. Which part of Carmilla creeped you out the most? Want more Gothic horror like Dracula, Frankenstein, or The Turn of the Screw? Let me know. Check the playlist for the full Carmilla series and all our other dark classics. Thank you so much for listening. See you in the next haunting tale.